So we have those basics set up, and now what we're going to do is set up our global state. And again, because we're using Vue 3, you could set up state very similar to how you might set it up if you were using React, or if you're familiar with React hooks. Um, we're going to go into our base source file, or excuse me, source folder, and I'm going to create a new one called global.js. And again, this is just what I'm naming it. You can name it state, you can name it whatever you would like. But I'm going to call it global.js. And then we're going to do a couple simple things. First thing we're going to do, because again, we're using Vue, we need to import from Vue. We'll do import statement from Vue, and we're going to bring in reactive. And again, if you're familiar with Vue, or if you're familiar at all with Vue 3, you know that reactive is basically when you want to set up an object to use. So I'm going to set up an object of state. It's going to be set up an object of state, and it's reactive. And we'll think about what do we want to have in this simple form. Again, let's just keep it super simple. We'll have a name, we'll have an email, we'll have a phone number, we'll have a, let's do an address. And matter of fact, you can, if you're familiar with this, you can even have an extra object inside of an object. So we'll say address, we'll have street, we'll have city, and we'll have state. I guess that includes zip too. So let's include zip. All right. What else do we need for this simple form? I don't know. Yeah, let's leave it there for now. We could always add more in. And what we need to do is export it out. Export default and state. That's all we need. Super, super simple. Right? So we'll save that. Now when we go to our home, so let me kind of show you how we're going to do this, and then we'll go back and fill it in a little bit more. But this will at least give you an opportunity to kind of see how to do these things and bring it in. And again, it's Vue 3 is very simple as far as how you do these things. So first we're going to do is, again, because we're using Vue 3, we need to import something. So let's import, actually first let's import the global. So we'll import global from global. Here it is, global. All right. And we're going to do our base setup in our thing. So setup. And in here, we're going to say const state is equal to global. Again, this way we can set up our basics here. Now, the other thing you really want to do is anytime you have your setup statement, you also want to return anything. So anything, whether it's, consts we set in here, refs, functions, we always have to return them. So that's the only thing that at least initially kept messing me up with Vue 3 was I'd write something, I'd be like, why doesn't this work? Well, it's because I did not bother to put it in a return statement. Sorry. In your setup, you want your return statement. Sorry about that. All right. So save this just so you can see the basics here. Okay, so we have the base save here. Let's look at Vue. in Chrome, our window that we have. Now, if you haven't, or you just installed your View tools, or there's been an update, you may need to restart Chrome. Again, because Vue is still in a beta, or excuse me, in a preview, there's a chance that your Vue may be out of date, and so will need to be updated. So, like, I had to update mine. Oops, I didn't mean to click that. Sorry about that. So, we're here, and we could look at our Vue, and you'll see that we have our routers and we have our steps. So now, as you can see, pull this down a little bit. From our global container, we have our reactive state with the email, phone number, and address that we pulled over from our global.js. And again, the great thing about this is I could pull it into as many steps as I have now, and as I make inputs, it will update this appropriate information and update the reactive state. So again, much nicer than having to install Vuex just for something very simple. That's something that could be a real pain. If you're trying to make a simple multi-step form, even a complex multi-step form, you might not need Vuex because you just don't have that much things that need to be passed along and updated. This is a very simple way to update this for just a multi-step form. Unless you want to, you can obviously have a single page application, which you can have it and hide the different divs between the different things, but I'm not doing that. I'm doing it in Vue Router. That way it routes to the different pages. And again, this is one way to make sure we have consistency across the board, is to pass the state with all the data inside of it. And again, even the object within the object of addresses. So that's great. I'm making a general assumption that if you're coming here, you're probably already familiar with Vue 3 and you just want to know how to do the state part of it to pass it along. But it is possibly coming from Vue 2. So if you already know the basics of Vue 3, you might want to skip this and go to the next video. If you're not, then I'll give you a basic overview of Vue 3. It would obviously be good for you to go to one of the beginner courses on how to use Vue 3 to get some more in depth. But I'll give you the basics of what you're going to need for here, so at least you can be familiar with it somewhat. So anyways, we have our basic setup of Vue 3. And as you can see, we have our setup function, and this is how we do things in Vue 3. And part of me thinks it was done this way just because you're coming from ES6 or coming from React hooks or something of that nature. The Vue 3 would be much simpler to pick up than using the Vue 2 method, or the way you used to do it in Vue 2. But I will show you how we step through these. And again, I know I set this up initially, and I'll leave that in there, but just to show you how it's still simpler. So say we were in Vue 2, we will still have our data function. Now again, obviously you don't have to set up as a function. You just see this a lot. So saying this one, I had in my data, I'm going to have a variable of business name. Let's call it V2 just to make our life easier. And we'll set that default as my consulting firm V2. Right? And if we were to have it in here, we would do the typical, what you're used to, this dot business name, there you go, V2. If we save it, let's come over here. And as you can see, we still have our original way we used to do things. And again, one thing that is actually very nice with Vue 2 and Vue 3, you can still do this, as you can see. I mean, I set up a data just like you normally would, and we do it our traditional way that we would. But if you're doing it the Vue 3 way, it's a little bit different. So let this instead, I can remove this, and I'm going to call this ref, and you'll see why in a second. Ref. All right. So in Vue 3, you don't have data, you don't have methods. You still do have computed, and you still do have functions. Let's see, why did I say functions? You still have computed, and you still have watchers. They're done differently though between 2 and 3. So first thing we need to do for view 3 is we need to actually import some of this information from view. So import from view, we're going to import reactive ref, and we're going to import reactive. The ref and reactive is pretty much how you would do your data in view 3. Okay? And again, the only difference is it's all set up in your setup functions. And so let's do the same thing. Const, what do I call that? Business. Business ref. And do the same thing. And again, if you're familiar with React hooks, it's very similar. We'll say ref, and the default is a string. Again, we'll call it my consulting firm ref. Right? And again, just like before, we have to make sure we return it. Business name ref. And as you can see, now don't worry about reactive yet because I haven't used it. That's why it's got the squiggly underline. You no longer have the this binding as you would. You just reference the constant. That's here. And as long as you have your constants and you return it, it will also return here. So let's do our thing, save it. Oh, where did I have an error? Oh, reactive is not. Sometimes when you set your thing up, it gets a little too sensitive about not having stuff, but that's fine, whatever. It's defined but never used, fine. And now as you can see, we have consulting ref. And so you can still set it up very similar. You can even mix and match your 2 and 3. It's not that different. I mean, there are, well, let me phrase that. You can set things up in 2 or 3. You can intermix 2 and 3, or what people call the composition API is what they reference to view 3. And so sometimes that's what you hear referred to as a composition API. And you do your reference here. But you also have reactive. Now, usually people use reference, and again, this may change, but right now what I'm generally seeing is people use ref when they want to have a singular reference point. If you want to have an object, then people tend to use reactive. And again, this may change in the future. But for right now, this is what it is. And so instead, I'm going to say reactive and reactive. And again, make sure you return it. That's one of the things that first messed me up when I was doing view 3 is I kept forgetting to return. and it would really mess me up because I'd be like, why isn't this thing working? It wasn't the code per se that was the issue, was I kept forgetting to return it. No, in changes to reactive. I almost forgot. Reactive, there we go. Reactive. Okay. And as you can see, here's reactive. Okay, so again, the setup here is pretty easy. Now you may say, well, why would I use it? The setup is easy. One great thing about Vue is you can set up functionality and data. I keep saying data because I'm so used to Vue 2. Your variables away from each other. So in other words, you don't have to worry about having your data up top and then your methods and then your watchers and your components. You can have your data, so to speak, your variables, your functions, and your watchers right next to each other as it relates to that bit of functionality. It's also a good time to show you that some of the differences with Vue 2 with references versus reactive. So we'll set up two simple numbers, and we'll say const number ref is equal to ref 2. Oops. Right. And we'll do const number reactive is equal to reactive 2. Oops. And then, of course, remember, you have to return these things in your setup function. So we'll say number ref and number reactive. Okay. So we'll set up a simple function. And again, under normal circumstances, you'd have to write data and then you'd have to write methods. You don't have to do that. You can write a normal arrow function, say normal, an arrow function just like you would in regular JavaScript here. So const, and we'll say calc number or calc numbers. All right. Make a simple arrow function. And we'll say, we'll just console log it for now so you can see. .log, and we'll say, number ref, right? And we'll say, give us the number ref. So we'll say, number ref dot value times 2. All right, and then we'll say number reactive times 2. And actually, let's do a button to do those, because, and of course they're complaining because I didn't return it. I said make sure you return it, and then I didn't do it myself. So cal numbers. Sometimes autocorrect can be not your friend. Call numbers. There you go. And let's put a button up here to activate that function. Calc. Let's at click, and we'll do calc numbers. Right? Calc numbers, yeah. Okay. So now it's not complaining. Okay, cool. All right, so let's go to our console. And if I do calc, you'll see reactive is 4, reference is 4, and reactive is 4. So when you're getting a reference, actually let's change it so you can see what you call it. Let's make this 4, just so you can see the difference a little bit more. When you're doing a reference, you need to reference the value. And again, if you're used to using JavaScript and you're trying to get like a target and input, you target, e.target.input.value, then it's kind of along the same lines. So you need to reference the value before you make a change. And it is strange because you would think then if you were up here, you need to say business.name.value. But for some reason you do not. If you just put reference, you just put the reference in here, it will just come up, it automatically will display the value. But if you want to change the value, you need to say, hey, you need to purposely change the value there. Can be good and bad. Maybe because then it forces people not to just change your variables willy-nilly. You have to make a conscious effort to change your value. So if you change your value, then you could do something. Where reactive, you could just say, hey, reactive, change, make the changes to the value without referencing value. Again, a little bit different. It can be a little strange. I know there's plenty of times where, yeah, so reference for reactive 8, where when I started with view 3, I would be going through things and I'd be like, oh, that's why it's not working, because I forgot to say value. Because then again, you don't have to reference value here. And it would, at least for me, it would throw me off at first. But when I want to make a change, and you do this a lot, you're doing an API call and you're saying, hey, go to this array and now make these list of items that you made from an empty array. Make that value now this list of returned objects or list of returned items from an API. But you have to reference value. I would forget and I'd want to understand why isn't this working? Why isn't it working? Because I didn't reference the value. But again, you only have to do that with refs. If you're doing reactive, you don't. You just straight reassign it. So again, just a basic introduction. If you want to know more, I really suggest taking a basic view class. A lot of good ones out there on YouTube, or buy one on Udemy or something. But I at least want to give you some basics, so as we're going through this, you won't be completely lost if you're not used to ref versus reactive versus using data, and again, using arrow functions instead of methods. And again, you don't have to use arrow functions. You can just use regular functions, using arrow functions instead of methods. We'll get into a little bit more as we go through the rest of this. I'll put this up as the start for this one, and then the next one we'll add some reactivity. Bye.